Hi everyone, this is Matt from Touchgrass Gardening. Today we're going to be planting a fruit tree, and I've planted over 100 of these in the past year, so there's quite a lot I've learned, and I wanted to share those learnings with you so that you can find planting a fruit tree less intimidating and easy and successful. So today we're going to start by digging the hole, which is what I've started with already. This is probably the most time-consuming thing in planting any tree is digging the hole, and that's why I've done it already. But here's some tips. So if you live in an area with clay soil, what you really want to start with is making the area wet. Of course, it's going to make the dirt heavier, but if it's not wet, it's almost impossible to dig in. So it's like cement if it isn't wet. And if it is wet, it kind of cuts a lot easier. So you've seen that this whole area is wet. Leave the hose on there a few hours, move the rocks back so that there's no rocks within, say, a foot of your hole, because you don't want any rocks to fall in when you're planting. And make it wet, leave it for a night, come back and start digging so that it's deeper than your pot. I usually go about the length of a pot and a half. And then what you're going to start doing is moving some of the soil that's around where you first dug your hole, and then combining it with the soil that you bought at the nursery. So the reason I do that is the soil that's nearer to the top has more nutrients than the soil that's at the very bottom, say 2 feet below the soil. So you're going to see more like worms and bugs towards the top of your soil, and you want that to go into the hole together with your nursery soil. So for me, I normally dig down first, and then I'll start pushing in some of this side soil as I'm mixing it together with the nursery soil. And then, you're going to dig pretty much enough so that you can sit your pot in there, and then you're going to take it out, which I'll show you. So today the fruit tree we're going to plant is a pluot. And in this area of my yard, I have plums, pluots, and pluaries. They're all stone fruit of the same variety of plums and cherries and apricots, which can pollinate each other. That's why I have different zones in my yard where the trees in that zone can pollinate on one another so that there's more of a crop. So you saw in my first video, I have another area that has jujubes, another area that's just different types of guavas, and this area is this plum, apricot, and cherry area. You can see I've got pluaries, I've got plum, and I've got another pluot over there. This tree, this pluot, is a multi-grafted. It has two varieties of pluot on one trunk. This was just a tree I picked up at Home Depot. I don't normally see this type of tree there, and it was such a good price for such a thick trunk tree, multi-grafted. It was 50 bucks. I thought I'm just going to pick it up and find space in my yard for it, which is something I often do, or I buy it before I think about where I'm going to put it, because it's just something that excites me when I go to the store. And so here I'm picking a spot that isn't 100% ideal, but it's good enough where it has 6 hours of sun, which is what you want for a stone fruit type of tree, and it's still by these other types of the same variety. And so, it's right next to this hopseed bush, so it seems a little bit clustered, but I can always trim this back as this tree gets bigger, and I can always trim the tree to fit into this area. So the tree is mostly going to grow up and out this way, and this hopseed, as the tree goes towards it, I can also trim it. So let's get started by putting it in the hole. All right, so after you dig the initial hole, you're going to want to start breaking up the sides of it so that it's wide enough for the tree to go into. I like to go, say, maybe 6 inches wider on each side than the actual pot. And so, again, I want some of that topsoil to be in the hole, because that's a little bit better soil than what's at the very bottom, which is kind of a thicker clay. So I'm going to start breaking it up, putting it in there. And I'm at the same time that I'm doing this, I'm also going to mix in some of the soil from the nursery. So I'll often go to a local nursery, get whatever soil they have for in-ground, and then maybe mix it together with, you could also use something like a a miracle grow for something like this. This is just a normal stone fruit. It's not a super sensitive tropical tree. Like if you're really planting something that's exotic, you want to get like a specialty soil. But for something like a pluot, a stone fruit like a peach, you don't need something all that specialty for it to grow, because eventually it's going to grow into this clay soil anyway. You just want to give it a buffer so that it starts to adjust before it hits that clay soil that's really tough. And a lot of these, grafts, they're made for any type of soil now. So if you see a label that, it's adjusted to your type of soil, whatever that might be, they're often labeled, they say they're adjusted to this type of soil or that type of soil. But most of them, they're made to not die, because especially at a place like Home Depot or Lowe's, you can return the trees for a year. And they don't want to sell things that will die within a year. And so they're definitely going to have a type of rootstock that is hardier for multiple types of soil. And so you can see, like in the hole, I have a good mix of kind of the clay native soil together with this nice rich black soil that I get from the nursery, this in-ground soil. And it's a mix of it. So it's not just one or the other, because what you want to do is get it to adjust to the soil before it gets all the way to just that native soil. So I like to mix it together so it has both the native soil and the nursery soil. And then once you're about what you might think is the length of the pot, the height of the pot, kind of adjust it down, make it to be about the height that you think it is, level it out, and then test it. Put the pot in the hole. So something that I've learned over time is, sometimes if you just take it out quickly, you don't think about it that much, what often happens is you're going to be planting too low, which is what you really don't want. If you plant too high, it's generally not an issue, because you can always just raise the soil level around it. But if you plant too low, the tree really won't be healthy. And this is something that I've learned through trial and error. I didn't think it was a real or serious thing until I planted a few trees too low, and they really didn't do well. So everything I planted high has done much better than what I planted low. And this also allows you to put like a nice mulch ring around any tree. So you can see I'm definitely going to try to plant it about 2 inches higher than grade. And this is about where I think I'm going to plant it. So at this point, I might want to do a little bit more around here so that it has a little bit more of a buffer zone in the circle around it. So I'm going to put a little bit more area here. Cut that out. So you want like, 4 to 6 inches bigger than the pot. A lot of places will tell you like, you should probably do double the width of the pot and double the height of the pot. But I think for trees that aren't extremely sensitive, that's not something that's necessary to ensure that the tree will survive, at least in my experience. And it's a lot of extra work to say make a hole that big. And in a lot of parts of your yard, you might just not have enough space to make a hole like that, or it's very heavy clay soil. It's just not something that you have time for. So I think, having a hole that's 6 inches wider and is about the height of your hole, your plant, you'll be fine. So don't overthink it. Just try to blend it into the hole and then make sure it's higher. So this is about the height that I want now. You see I'm about 2 inches above grade. And at this point, something that I've learned through difficulty is how to plant without losing the bottom half of the pot. And so oftentimes you'll push around on the pot and hopefully you can just lift it out. I've seen a lot of guys at nurseries, they just take the tree, they lift it right out, put it on in. But with a lot of trees, especially if it's not fully rooted in the pot, which means the roots are throughout the entire pot, people say something's rooted, that's what they mean. But for these type of trees, which are usually sold as just bare root, they're often just put into dirt, and the roots are not bound into the pot. They're just sitting there. And so if you pull it out, the roots will just pull out and the dirt will stay. Or when you put it in or you pull it out, the bottom half of the roots will just fall off and disconnect. I've had that happen as well. So I've kind of developed this new method that I like, that helps me ensure that I don't have either of those problems happen. And so basically what you want to do is find a big knife and cut the bottom of the pot out. So just like find a spot on the bottom of the pot, cut the bottom of the pot out. Now this knife is pretty dull already, because I've probably used it for 50 pots or so. And these knives aren't really made for plastic, but it's still working if I put some effort into it. Now I just take it, sit it there now, where I want it to be. Now the bottom of the pot is open. And so, you can put this back in eventually, it's fine, but you also notice I cut the very bottom layer of the roots off. And that's going to stimulate the bottom of the roots to start regrowing themselves. So oftentimes you'll get this kind of fishbowl effect with really rooted pots, where it just wants to stay where it's at, especially if it's so thick of roots. And you really want to cut the very bottom of it to stimulate it to start growing out again. So that's one reason I do this, but the main reason is so that I don't lose the roots and I can keep all the dirt. Now I'm going to find my clipper. I'm going to make a big cut in the top of the pot. I'm going to cut down a little bit. Cut all the way down to the bottom of the pot with my same knife that I cut eventually until I get there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start backfilling soil. So that same soil that I started mixing together with my native dirt, I'm going to put it in just by itself. So it's now that very nutritious nursery soil that'll help the roots that are right around where the pot's going into start to develop fast, because this is soil that's something that any tree would love to live in for its whole life, but eventually it's going to have to go beyond that into my clay soil that isn't very good. But this tree can do it once it starts to establish more roots that are stronger around it. You can see I'm putting it all around the pot. Ensure that it doesn't have any air bubbles or gaps. You can also notice I pre-mixed this soil, so there's no pancaking of the soil. There's no problems between this and any type of other soil that I put in there. It's all a very nice consistency that doesn't have to be mixed once it's in the hole. And that's another thing I've learned is you want to pre-mix all your soil and you want to dig that hole so that you can just put it in like this. And now that you have a pretty nice ring of soil around there, you just can take the pot, move it out a little bit, jiggle it, comes right out. Now what I want to do is move it in a little bit, get it nice in there, and start to break up the top a little bit, because a lot of these trees, there's a bit more soil around the top than you'd like, because you want those taproots to be seen. You want those roots right around the trunk to get some oxygen. And so I'll rub this off at least a couple centimeters until I start to see more and more roots. Once I feel and see roots, sometimes you even find garbage on the top from the nurseries that you want to take out of there. And so you can see there's a couple roots that are sticking up now here and there. That's what I really want to see. I want to see those there, and then I want to see that it's pretty even throughout. And at this point, one of the most important things you can do when you're planting a tree is figure out if it's level or not. And the reason you want to do that is because correcting a leveling problem is a huge pain. So you have to put stakes in, you're going to have to put all this, stabilizing tape onto the stakes. I really hate doing that. So for me, I spend extra time making sure the tree is level when I first put it in the hole. So, I'll go to either side of it, take a look at it, make sure it feels level to me. It looks straight. It's how I want it to grow. Right now, this one looks pretty good. I think it's level. I think I just got kind of lucky with this on how I planted it. And it looks really level. So I want it to be perfectly level. Don't just throw it in the hole and say, oh, it's good enough, I'll correct it later. You'll save yourself hours of time if you correct it right now and make sure that it's level. So I think maybe you can move a little bit this way. So I'll move it this way. Then I'll push in this side. So push in the side that you want it to be away from. And now that I feel like it's pretty level, I'm going to push it in a little bit more all around. Because one thing you'll also notice when you plant a tree like this is, depending on how big you made the hole, it's going to sink a few inches. And that's another reason you want to plant it high, is because these trees will sink because this soil is so much less dense than the clay soil that it's under. So it'll often compress and sink down over time as it gets watered, as it gets more in it from just all the elements, from the dust and other clay soil around it. So you're going to notice that most trees will sink an inch or two a year after you plant them. That's another reason that when I used to plant at ground level, all the trees I did that, they're an inch or two below ground level now. And they look bad and they're unhealthy. So at this point, I'm going to put a little bit more soil around it, just to kind of, especially on this area where the ground is slanted down. I want to make sure that there's enough soil that it feels comfortable in all directions, because the ground here is at a little bit of an incline. And so I want to make it feel level all throughout where the tree is. I'm going to put a little extra soil on this side where there's a slanted incline down. All right. So now at this point, soil is pretty much level throughout the tree. And this is not the end. What you want to do, at least how I like doing it, is I'll put my slow release fertilizer on at this point. So I use this Osmocote Plus, but for this type of tree that's going to go dormant soon, I don't want to use much because I don't want to stimulate too much of it. I just want to make sure that the roots know that they should start establishing themselves. So I'm really not going to do much. I'm just going to kind of pinch some of this in. It's a very slow release fertilizer. It doesn't have a whole lot of nitrogen in it. Nitrogen is what makes leaves grow, give you that nice green foliage. But the potassium and phosphate, which is the second two letters you see on any fertilizer, that'll make the roots grow a little bit more. So that's what I want right now. And now that I have that slow release fertilizer on, I'm also gonna use a little bit of gypsum, which is good for clay soils. I'm gonna put that kind of around where you see the tree will have to go into clay. And gypsum is good for softening clay. So as it starts to go into the clay, I want it to have a little bit easier time and feel a little bit softer for the roots. So I'll put gypsum there. And then the last step for the hole itself is to put mulch around it. And so you can buy any type of natural mulch at a nursery. I like this composted mulch. What I would really caution people away from is buying sort of this artificial rubber mulch that you see in certain places. You want something that will decompose, something that'll give the tree more nutrients, won't just sit there and look good. So you might have to look for that specifically where you are, but any type of nursery, most of them will only have more natural mulch Whereas a lot of places like Home Depot and Lowe's, they'll have more of that rubber mulch, which is not really the greatest for trees. And so you want to be pretty liberal with mulch. I don't want it right around my trunk, but everywhere else, like I'm really liberal with the mulch. I like to put a lot on it, keep the moisture in, and then feed a lot of nutrients to the tree. So I'm gonna spread this around so it's a nice big circle. Make it nice and even throughout. And after this, we're almost done. Last couple things I'm gonna do is put some fish emulsion on there just to stimulate the roots some more. And then I'm gonna make it look pretty by putting some leaves on so it's consistent with the rest of my area here. So see, it looks pretty much like an established tree now. Now it just needs a little bit of extra stimulation to make sure it wakes up, at least the roots themselves. And for that, I really like using this Neptune's Harvest organic fish and seaweed fertilizer. This is kind of a staple in the gardening community, but if you haven't used it before, it's really high quality stuff that I've found to be quite useful. So just gonna mix it up, pour a little bit in there, not too much. The thing with this is the only way you're gonna damage your tree is if you use too much. That's always the thing with fertilizers is I never want to use too much. If I use too little, I can always add more. So I'll just have my pot fill up, mix it up, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2 rounds of this, and then I'm going to take some leaves and cover up this mulch area so it's not just one black circle amongst everything else. So it looks like the rest of my yard. So it has leaves around it, just like this other area. It kind of blends in with everything else. Because mulch is, great for the tree, but isn't always the most appealing thing to have these big black mounds all around in your yard. So I'll often try to cover it with something or help it to blend in with the rest of my yard. All right, so for this, just pour it on. Generally, you want to have it right around where the tree actually is, as opposed to the extra area where the mulch is. And you can see that the mulch is about an inch higher, about a foot away from the tree, so that I kind of create this well where when I'm watering the tree, the water or fertilizer that I put in there stays nearer to the tree as opposed to running off. And that's another reason why we made this area here level with the ground, even though it's at an incline, because you can see that the water will stay. If I had let this incline remain, the water would be draining out here. And that's not what I want. I really want, this water to stay here and then go straight down, because that's where the tree is. It doesn't really make sense to be fertilizing the area all around it right now. Over time, I want to do slow waterings, but for your first planting, you really don't need to be using, like 100 gallons of water to make the whole area super wet. Because remember, the soil is somewhat wet from when you dug your hole. At least in my clay soil, that's how I'll do it. You see, sometimes it gets a little pooling. When you see too much pooling, you take a break so that it doesn't run off. But you can see it's mostly just going straight down into the hole, which is where the roots are, and that's what I want. And right now, I think this tree will probably lose its leaves in about a month or so. You can see that there's also some flowers, because a lot of these trees that you see at big box stores are grown in nurseries. And those nurseries, a lot of them they're in a really temperate area like Florida or California, and they don't really have the same climate as where you're going to be planting and growing them yourself. So you'll see strange things like flowering in November or December when you buy a tree. Oftentimes people will say, you can pick all these off, you'll give the tree more energy for the rest of the roots and the leaves to grow. I think that's probably accurate, but I don't think it's necessary, because the tree will know, it'll acclimate to what it's actually living in over time. And for me, I think the flowers are beautiful, so I'll let them live while they're there. So I don't want to pick off all the flowers, because eventually they're going to fall anyway when they realize it's getting colder. So oftentimes trees are more adaptable than you really think that they will be. You don't have to do so much to treat a tree like a science experiment, unless it's a tree that's super sensitive, which we'll get to in other parts of my yard. But you can see that the pooling has kind of gone down. When I finish this 5-gallon pot of fish emulsion fertilizer, this is just about enough for the tree. After I finish this pot of water, I am gonna add leaves around it. So I always like to have leaves around in my yard, just so I can cover them, or newly planted trees, with the leaves, because it's more of like a natural environment. You think of how a forest is, where trees are native, where they grow best, and they're often full of leaves. They're leaves on the ground. And so these are just leaves that have, over time, been a part of my yard. I don't like to have them scattered everywhere, but you can see it's enough to make it look like it just blends in. Like, we just planted this tree, but I want it to seem like it's been here for a long time. So it not only makes it look good, but it's also healthy for the tree to have more leaves around it. So now you can play with this a little bit, make it look really pretty, eventually how you want it to be. But that's kind of the full tutorial on how to plant a fruit tree. I hope this was beneficial for you guys. For me, I planted over 100 fruit trees in the past year, so I've learned a lot, and some of the lessons I've shared today, I hope they are beneficial to you. So thank you for watching this video. If you made it this far, really appreciate it. I hope you like and follow the channel and share it with your friends. Thanks.